purpose of this recording is to give you an overview of the context of leadership and change management in relation to the course Leading for Change.
Yes, this is a very complex field of study, and what we hope to do is to walk through with you some of the major points as we discuss them, and we'd like to highlight some of these as we develop these slides. So what is leadership? Were you expecting to find a single definition? As you can see from this slide, we'll have to disappoint you.
My comment about this graphic is that if you look at those 6 definitions, all from esteemed authors in the field, you'll find they're all quite different. So I think the answer is no, there is no common understanding of leadership. For example, look at the top left quote, and that describes leadership being the behaviour of an individual. And later in this course, you'll actually look at expected or desirable behaviours of leaders towards followers to achieve a certain outcome. Then if you go down to the bottom left quotation, it's about the ability of the individual, i.e. the leader, to influence, motivate and enable others towards a particular outcome for an organisation. So the top one's about individual focus, the bottom is about an organisational context. And then if you read through the remaining 4, you'll see that each of them is actually quite different in the way that it understands the notion of leadership.
So we take a look at all these definitions. You'll see that some of these definitions will focus on the individual as the person, the leader, and some of these definitions will focus on the process of leadership. Now we'll try and take you through these definitions. We'll encourage you to look up these definitions and to decide for yourselves whether there is one style of leadership or whether there are many styles of leadership depending on the circumstance that you encounter.
Keith, I think what you're describing there is the concept of situational leadership, or sometimes called contingency theory of leadership. And that point of view says that, yes, leaders need to behave, respond, appear differently according to the kinds of situation they're facing or the kinds of people they're dealing with in terms of staff or the general public or an organisation. So not only do we have different definitions of leadership, but we have debate in the literature about the most appropriate style of leadership in certain circumstances.
So what we're doing in this course is giving you the skills to know about some of these theories and how to approach the subjects of leadership and how to come up with some of these various classifications of leadership.
Yeah, that's true, Keith, but I don't know about you, but I find classifications really boring. So what I want us to get out of this course is to have that as a background to underpin our understanding of leadership. But really the whole purpose of this course is to build leadership and change management skills, because going out into the workforce, they're 2 critically important skill sets for leaders and for change managers. So yes, let's get a good understanding of definitions, theories, frameworks and background knowledge, but with the purpose of becoming better leaders and change managers.
I think so. It is becoming increasingly important to distinguish between leadership and management. Back in Fayol's time, he was dealing with a form of uncertainty, but the only way they knew how to deal with uncertainty in the early management era was to look at management functions of planning, organizing, directing, and controlling. Now, control is an interesting topic. Do leaders control, or do managers control? So if we take a look at early management practice, breaking it into these functions, we may seem to criticize that particular management model as lacking in human factors. What do you think?
I think that, well, the top box management functions, as you mentioned, is from Henri Fayol, and my understanding of the way business was conducted in those days, in previous centuries, was that it was very much around the organisation and the needs and desires and motivation of employees was not something that was highly valued. And you can even come to last century and talk about Taylorism, and it's still the same concept that people are just, in a sense, parts of machinery. So I think, yes, management functions, that concept is still used today. But I guess one of the messages of this graphic is that there is this kind of tension between management function and leadership function. And you'll see in the graphic we say that managers strive for stability and predictability. And that makes sense because you need to know that you've got a stable supply of raw materials for your processes, that you've got a labour force, and you've got a stable market to sell your product or your service. So management is in many ways about ensuring stability. Leadership, I guess, is, if it's the same person, there's this real tension because if I'm the manager and the leader, I'm trying for stability, but now I'm also, as a leader, trying to change things. So how you resolve that internal conflict, I guess, is something that as leaders, as business practitioners, we need to work through and resolve. And in this course, when thinking about your leadership development plan, I think quite central should be who am I, what am I, and how do I manage this tension? And I think for leadership, the ideas of flexibility, responsiveness, and adaptability are quite critical. And I think that in large organisations, there's often a different function and different people. So the leadership is different to the management. And in some other courses, you will have covered the concept of managerialism, the rise of a managerial class, which didn't exist in prior centuries. And some people say that managerial class is not leadership, it's management. But it varies and it depends on complexity of the organisation, part of the world you live in, and a whole lot of other variables.
Now, Ian, just now, the introduction, you said you didn't like classifications. You found classifications to be boring. Well, I'm different to you because I like classifications. It helps me to think. It helps me to make sense of the world. Something else that I also found to be very useful is to think in terms of frameworks. And in this example, if you take a look at this slide, it presents the ideas of leadership in a graphical form. Now, looking at this graphical form, you'll see that leadership is not in isolation. Leadership actually depends on a few external factors. If you take a look at the top, there's a circle that says there's a leader as the person. That leader does not work in isolation. That leader works within a context. Now, that context could be within the company. It could be the context of globalization. And of course, you can't actually be a leader if there are no followers. So sometimes I find models and frameworks to be very useful in terms of visualization. What do you think?
I think you unfairly malign me, Keith. I think it's really important. We do need frameworks and models. And my point earlier was to say that they're really just a tool to better equip us to be leaders and change managers. So yes, I absolutely agree. We've got to have models. And in fact, a whole lot of university education centres on the idea of developing and understanding models. Again, in this graphic, you've mentioned that we've got three components or dimensions. There's the leader himself or herself, the context within which leadership's practiced, and something about the followers. Now, if I am to criticise the model that's presented here, it's because it's a bit too simplistic. So to say circle 1 is the leader in red, well, but what does that mean? You've got to populate that model with some ideas and concepts. For the followers, who are they and how do you describe them? So yeah, it's a great starting point, but ultimately it's got to come back to some skills and characteristics, behaviours, expectations of the leader, the followers, and the context. And I guess what I do like about the diagram is that in Venn diagram terms, the intersection of all three considerations is the notion or the practice or the essence of leadership.
And I think you're right. Bearing in mind that when we draw models, we're making some broad assumptions. And the world changes again, and you may see the world in a different way to the way I see the world. So the model of leadership that you will draw will be different to the way I interpret leadership.
And the real trick is that, like everything else in academia, there is no one correct view. So if Keith understands leadership Keith is from Asia, so I imagine that your background provides certain understandings of desirable leadership styles, desirable followership styles, and indeed a different context. I was born in Australia, so I would have been exposed in my early life to different sets of ideas. And one of the characteristics of a good leader is to know how to interpret and manage different cultural expectations. The other thing I'd like to point out in this graphic is that we've labelled a leader and a set of followers, but isn't it always the case that a leader is also a follower, particularly in a complex organisation? So again, I repeat, it's quite a simplistic model, but certainly a good starting point for considering leadership and followership.
Certainly a good starting point and a very nice visual presentation.
So the question is, what is change? Now, I guess there's a million answers to the question. If you look at it from a personal frame of reference, we all experience change in our lives, and we have various ways of responding to changes. If the change is external to you, out of your control, a usual first step is to resist the change. And there's a lot of psychology behind the way we respond to change, and we'll come back to that point later in this course when we talk about managing change. If the change is something that you're driving, then hopefully you've got a clear strategy and a clear set of imperatives about why you wanted to change something in the first place. So planned change, to me, suggests that you've got a clear sense of direction. You recognize that something is wrong with the current status, current paradigm, and you're wanting to move and change to create a better outcome. Whether that outcome relates to profit, satisfaction, greater good of the community, environment, whatever it is, you should have some kind of predictable desired outcome for your change process. The other aspect of change in organizations is that it's often not apparent why change is occurring. Many times in organizations, you're told that things will be done differently. There's no apparent logic behind it. No one communicates that change is important or how it might occur. And again, for a person, that raises your resistance. You think, I don't understand why it's happening, I will resist. So later again in the course, we'll talk about the critical importance of communicating the reason for change and the expected future paradigm or future shape of things so that we know where we're heading. So change is quite a complex concept, and this graphic is meant to give just a starting sense of the different ways we can understand change, and then, I guess as a building block, how we might then deal with the change process.
Look, Ian, you're going to criticize me again for coming up with simplistic models, but this model here is, a very nice indication of what drives change, drivers of change. And I think most people would be able to recognize that, for example, one of the factors that impinges on organizations today is the lowering of tariff barriers, industry deregulation. Of course, there's been an advancement from the industrial age to the information age, and constant advances in information technology. I can see straight away what you mean by the advantage of these models, but also how these models can be simplistic. Because if you think about it, one of the major drivers of change today would be the environment, and that's missing from the model.
I think you're right. I don't know how old this graphic is, and one of the other issues about academia is that we often rely on authors, researchers, experts who've produced material from some decades past. And even if you look in your textbook, you'll find that there's quite a variety of timelines within the material. And I think you're absolutely right that the environment is the number one issue, no matter what we're addressing in business, but certainly the case in leadership and change. In terms of industrial age, you mentioned that, and we would say that in most of the advanced parts of the world, we're post-industrial, as Daniel Bell would like to label it. But if we were talking about drivers of change in an economy that is still developing, then obviously this model doesn't apply. So again, my caution is, it's good for a general starting point for a discussion, you've pointed out some drivers of change are missing from the model, and I'm now critiquing it because it doesn't necessarily apply in all environments.
That's right, and one of the things we have to learn is that as we learn these tools, we use these tools, and we use tools to describe the complexity of the world. We've also got to realize the limitations of what we can do with these diagrams.
Yes, indeed. And my final comment about this graphic is it's about drivers of change that appear to be addressing organisations and indeed whole economies. There's nothing there about what drives individuals to change themselves. And again, because this is a course about leadership and change management, I think a really important thing to think through is what are your personal drivers for your own change process? So we've talked a bit about our own understanding of leadership and change management ideas, frameworks, approaches, models. Let's take a step outside of RMIT and listen to two people we've selected who are, I guess, gurus in their own fields. The first is Andrew Dudgeon, who kindly came into the RMIT studio and shared his views about what leadership and change management means to him. Now, at the time, he was the CEO of Rolls-Royce Australasia and also has a background in the Australian military and indeed an executive with Qantas. So quite a diverse background in terms of leadership experience. The second you'll hear from is Rosbeth Moss-Cantor, who's a very well-known researcher, publisher, academic in the field of leadership and change management. So have a listen to what both have to say and see how effectively that gels with your understanding of the concepts of leadership and change management. Are there like 4 or 5 things you could describe that you think are most central or most important to leadership?
Well, leadership in the business sense is to run a successful organisation that's turning a profit, and ethically, obviously. But it comes down to, from my perspective, you'd be failing as a leader if you delivered those 2 things and you had an unhappy workforce. To run an organisation that's truly successful, you want harmony, you want happiness, you want, it sounds a bit, tree hugging, but you want a happy organisation that want to come to work every day. You want them to get up in the morning and say, I'm going to work at Rolls-Royce today and I'm happy about it. I've seen people who get up and go to work and truly hate what they're doing, but they're a very successful organisation. Now, I wouldn't want to be a part of that. I think as a leader, you want people coming to work excited that they're going to work because it will only make the organisation and the business stronger. Because happy people dedicate themselves to work, they will find new and improved ways of doing things because it's in their interests in the business organisation. Unhappy people will almost hate you for it and they come to work to spite you. Oh, I'm doing this because I'm going to get paid. Well, you might run a successful business that way, but you won't run a world-beating one. If you want to do well, you've got to, again, work with the people that work for you. Make them happy and you'll have a happier organisation.
Face. If they've had big investments in certain kinds of information technology infrastructure, and it's hard to think about how much more that they should spend, that's a barrier. In some countries, it's very hard for enough customers or employees to have access to the internet at work or in their offices. Some people simply don't have the skills. In fact, one barrier to change in many companies comes from CEOs who don't believe in the internet or in the new economy, and sometimes it's because the CEO doesn't know how to type, what we now call keyboarding skills. But I did a study 20 years ago for a company concerned about whether office automation, the use of computers in the office, was going to spread. And I discovered 20 years ago that one of the barriers to change was CEOs who felt that typing or sitting at a keyboard was something their secretaries did, and they shouldn't bother. So sometimes the resistance comes because of lack of skills, lack of confidence, lack of technology, lack of infrastructure. But more often it comes because the change process is not inclusive and does not give enough people the opportunity to participate. Also, sometimes companies lack confidence and don't know how much to invest and don't give enough room in their own culture and environment for experiments, for new ventures. I've found that the companies that are best at managing change not only have leaders who embrace change and champion it, but they also have vehicles for people to set up projects and ventures and break the rules and move out of what I call the mainstream organization that has rules and procedures and fixed compensation schedules and all kinds of people there to tell you what you can and can't do. Often, new ventures, entrepreneurial projects, opportunities to create something new using the internet require stepping outside of that mainstream organization and setting up what I call a new stream venture, a special team, a special project that has its own space, the autonomy to do things its own way, because after all, it is changing things. So maybe the old rules and procedures don't apply.
Now, we're thinking about change, and we believe that globalization is a very powerful force that's pushing change in various directions in different parts of the world. We've selected a short YouTube video to show you, to get you thinking about the kinds of forces that are pushing change, and at the end of the video we'll then pose some questions about the kinds of things that are relevant to you in your environment.
Words, damned words. In any university course, you're going to come across quite a few new and complex words like paradigms, frameworks, models, and theories. For example, you may come across the leadership framework, or it can sometimes also be referred to as the leadership model. And you'll hear theories from various experts, and some people will call them paradigms or methods and approaches. Now, do you have any tips, Ian, on how to learn about these words and how they're used?
First of all, Keith, I think if you're not familiar with the terms, then first step is go to a dictionary, get a basic understanding of what the word actually means. Unfortunately, what the word is defined as in a dictionary is often not how it's applied in practice. And in my own mind, when I think about these 6 labels, if you like, they overlap quite significantly. And one of the frustrations I have when engaging with the management literature, indeed the wider business literature, is that theorists or authors try to conveniently box people into specific categories that are mutually exclusive. And in my world, it's not like that. You know, there's often overlap between ideas or categories, and I think the same applies with these 6 labels, that they are quite complex concepts, and there's no way we can describe them and define them here. I think you have to go away and read them and absorb the concepts. Maybe a good starting point is to choose one. So let's choose paradigms and try to work through what we understand paradigm to mean. And to do so, I've pulled out an old advertisement from some decades ago as a starting point for discussion. So here we have an advertisement from the Hoover Company selling vacuum cleaners. The purpose here is to look at this image and to try to describe what's going on here. What is the paradigm? What are the rules of engagement that this advertisement suggests?